We begin the day with the question, is the Ukrainian military now ready to strike back against the Russians? 5 months into this war, and the momentum appears to be with Russian forces. Less than 2 weeks ago, they captured half of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region, and attacks on the other half have increased ever since. Ukraine has vowed not to cede another inch of territory to Russia. At the same time, Ukraine appears to be preparing to launch an offensive in the south of the country, holding the line in the east and pushing back the Russians down south. Is Ukraine now equipped with Western weapons to follow through? According to Kyiv, we will soon find out.
Bits of this building were still collapsing when rescue workers pulled this woman out of the rubble. Her apartment in Kyiv was raining dust after Russia attacked the city again with artillery, rockets and tanks. Many elderly citizens of Ukraine have had to watch their homes crumble or burn. Putin, you are a... What have you done? There are old people here and you're doing such bad things to them. You will burn in hell. Kharkiv's schools have also been hit hard. Officials say more than 180 have been lost to the war. This one was a boarding school for children who are visually impaired.
2 of my children study here. One is 14, the other is 9 years old.
Further east in the city of Chasiv, Russian rockets landed on 3 apartment buildings, killing several people. Russia continues to claim that it is only attacking targets of military value, but try telling that to those people still working through a mountain of rubble, brick by brick, in the hope of finding more survivors.
Well, my first guest tonight says Ukrainians who predict a victory against Russian forces sooner rather than later are living in a fantasy. Barry Posen details what he calls weak reasoning by Ukraine and the West in his Foreign Affairs article entitled Ukraine's Implausible Theories of Victory, the Fantasy of Russian Defeat, and the Case for Diplomacy. Mr. Posen is a political science professor at MIT. Professor Posen, it's good to have you with us tonight. You know, in the past 5 months or so, I've spoken with numerous military analysts from Kyiv to London to Washington, and they've all said the same thing. If we give Ukrainians the weapons that they need, they will win. If we don't, this will be a war of attrition. Are they wrong on both counts here?
Well, I think if the Ukrainians are resupplied with sufficient weapons from the West, they can probably continue to defend most of the rest of their country with pretty good probability of success. The issue here is, can enough weapons be provided to Ukraine, and can Ukraine build enough combat units and combat power to overcome the Russians in the areas that they've taken? So the situation switches, right? The Ukrainians will be fighting outnumbered in an attempt to mount a counteroffensive to take back real estate that the Russians will be defending. This is a very, very daunting task. Not impossible, but very daunting.
We know that the United States is providing the lion's share of weapons to Ukraine, the UK contributing the most among the Europeans, but that's still tiny compared to the U.S. And we always hear that this is superior U.S. technology on the battlefield that the Ukrainians are receiving. Is there no significant advantage for the Ukrainians with this?
Well, so far, much of the technology that's been provided has been in the form of anti-armor weapons, and they've been very good anti-armor weapons, weapons that allow Ukrainians to kill tanks at very long ranges. And by the way, the Ukrainians built some excellent weapons of this kind themselves. And I think the numbers and the densities have made it very hard for the Russians to launch sort of massive tank attacks supported by infantry without suffering, great casualties. But this has forced the Russians back into a more cautious artillery and infantry-based method of attack, and they've been very successful with that. The Ukrainians aren't getting the long shots, so now it's a bit of an artillery duel. And the West built some good artillery and good artillery command and control and sensors. But the numbers that the Russians have on the battlefield are really quite striking. And they have plenty of ammo. Whether the ammo is good ammo or not is another question, but they have plenty of it and they're willing to shoot it.
And if we leave the battlefield for a moment and consider the economic sanctions, you write that these sanctions are not going to cripple Russia the way that the West is anticipating. That there are analysts who would argue that the sanctions need time to take effect and that this is only month 5 of the war. What do you say to that?
It's hard to argue with it. I mean, you can always say that sanctions take time to take effect. The question is trying to estimate or guesstimate what the long-term, possibilities are. And you're up against some big facts with the Russians. It's mostly an autarkic economy. It's energy independent. It has plenty of arable land. It has an industrial base. It has a big and talented population. It's a very large country. It has some allies in the world that are willing to help it. In terms of exports and imports. They're selling oil for cash and they're making good money at it. It's very hard to stop them. So I just don't see that the pressure that the West can put on them is enough to get a capitulation. I think it might be enough to get a negotiation. It's a concession that you can use in a negotiation, but I don't think it can ever put enough pressure on the Russians to make them buckle on this score.
Professor Posen, I noticed too in your article, you write that the Russians are likely to have a high tolerance for pain. Are you implying that Ukrainians' tolerance level is lower than the Russians?
No, I'm not actually implying that at all. I think the Ukrainians have been enormously heroic. They're clearly a very nationalistic people, and so are the Russians. So you're basically, at some level, as the war deteriorates into an attrition war and a war of economic sanctions and whatnot, it's really, which country is willing to suffer more and which country has the deeper reserves that allow it to suffer more. And the problem is that the Russians are just a bigger country than Ukraine. They're a lot bigger country. And they have a bigger economy and a bigger GDP. And the Russians have managed to hurt Ukraine economically in ways that are quite telling, and we haven't figured out a way around yet in terms of grain exports. So I respect the Ukrainians, and I think they probably, as I said in my piece, they probably can hold the Russians to a stalemate. They can hang on to much of their country because of that commitment and that heroism. But the Russians are also committed as well. Putin controls the communications inside the country. He controls the media. He controls the elites. And he's basically told a story to his people that many seem to accept, that this is a matter of national security for the Russian nation state. So we can't simply assume that the Russians know they're the bad guys, and because they know they're the bad guys, they're somehow going to slink away. They don't know they're the bad guys.
Well, you are recommending a diplomatic resolution to this conflict. And if I'm reading you correctly, you're suggesting maybe we should try to get both Ukraine and Russia to agree to maybe the pre-February 24th borders. Am I reading you right?
No, I'm not really. You're reading too much optimism into my piece.
Okay.
I believe that getting an actual agreement on those borders will be extremely hard. Right? The Ukrainians are going to have to decide if they want to keep fighting or they want to concede some more real estate. Now, how they concede pieces of their territory, their national patrimony, is really going to be up to a negotiating kind of process. But I think we're at a point, if my analysis of these different strategies is right, that going back to the February borders is probably not going to be a negotiable proposition. If the Ukrainians want those borders back, they're going to have to try and fight for them. And I don't think they'll succeed.
Professor Barry Posen with MIT. It's fascinating talking with you, Professor Posen. And please come back, because I have a feeling this war will have some very long legs on it. There'll be opportunities to talk again. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be pleased to speak with you again, but sad that we have to do so.